I don't mean to sound insulting, but on my planet, we have been taught that gender is primitive.
Primitive?
Less evolved.
Maybe so. But sometimes there's a lot to be said for an experience that's primitive.
Star Trek has examined a number of social issues over the decades, from depicting members of minority groups in non-stereotyped ways to openly discussing civil rights at a time when race riots and movements for equality were at their volatile height, to showing women thriving in leadership positions alongside their male counterparts. Trek has also looked at more interpersonal issues like family and romantic relationships. And just as technology improves our lives and takes us into the future, romantic and platonic love tend to dominate our current adult lives. But one area Trek has not really explored lies at the intersection between romance and social issues. Sure, Star Trek is one of the first televised interracial kisses in America, but the hot-button topic 15 years into the 21st century seems to be same-sex relationships. For the United States of America, bringing up love in the context of gay and lesbian people can sometimes be a shortcut to disagreement.
Well, the Supreme Court has issued a decision today, but it will not end the conversation about what marriage is and why it matters for America.
Some people are made uncomfortable by the idea of same-sex interactions, claiming that such interactions are unnatural, despite the fact that same-sex behaviors are observed widely across many different species in nature. Thanks to the persistence of the LGBT community and their allies, the United States and other Western countries are starting to accept the reality of human nature regarding the sexuality and gender spectrums. Society has made great strides toward LGBT equality as of late, although there are still plenty of battles to be won. So how does Star Trek interface with this real-world debate over the acceptance of gay and lesbian people? Generally with a conspicuous absence of comment, but occasionally with a strong whisper from the back of the room.
I have decided to allow my child to choose its own sex and appearance.
Commander Data, at your convenience, I would like to talk with you in my ready room. Counselor.
Many times throughout the franchise, alien beings and creatures of varying types of sexualities are written into the show in order to add a diverse texture to the Star Trek multiverse.
My oath of celibacy is on record, Captain. May I assume my duties?
Valiance.
For example, the Nobulans, a race brought to life almost single-handedly by the brilliant performances of John Billingsley, have large, open, polyamorous marriages. The Nobulan husbands tend to have 3 wives, and each wife may be married with up to 3 additional husbands. This leads to quite the extended family. Never part of a crucial plot point, the Nobulan sexuality serves only to add to the diversity of the background of Star Trek and maybe to embarrass Trip.
Don't you find her attractive? Oh, sure. I mean, no, she's your wife. What does that have to do with it?
This is just an example of the sort of background filler we get in Star Trek that touches on matters of sexuality. Other episodes play jazz with our expectations for a variety of reasons. Stories like DS9's The Emperor's New Cloak, which depicts open bisexual and homosexual behavior as marks of a decadent, morally corrupt mirror universe.
You're Esri, right? Captain Smiley wants me to debrief you.
Must be my lucky day.
DS9's Prophet and Lace, where Quark has a full-on sex change.
I can do this. It's only one meeting. I can be a female for one meeting.
And episodes like the original series Turnabout Intruder and Voyager's Body and Soul, which involve gender swaps.
You became sexually aroused in my body.
Yet the vast majority of this universe building does not address homosexuality directly. Discussions of alternative sexuality, when they happen at all, serve mostly as plot points that give the characters problems to be solved. On a couple of occasions, we find ourselves in what we as an audience might recognize as a kind of accidental homosexual circumstance. Specifically, 2 episodes stand out most prominently in this regard, and both feature the Trill species. In The Next Generation's The Host, Dr. Beverly Crusher falls in love with Ambassador Odan, a joined member of the Trill. In case you missed it, joined means that the ambassador has a kind of intelligent worm in his gut, living in consensual symbiosis with him. In fact, the worm, or symbiont, is the ambassador in this case, and the host is the humanoid body that the ambassador inhabits. During the course of negotiations with the Alpha and Beta moons of the Federation world, Peliarzel, Ambassador Odan is gravely injured and has to find a new host immediately, which temporarily becomes Commander Riker. In fact, during the course of the episode, there are 2 host changes due to medical reasons. Dr. Crusher is understandably confused and hurt by the experience of host change and is ultimately unprepared for being involved with a joint Trill.
Perhaps it is a human failing, but we are not accustomed to these kinds of changes. I can't keep up.
In DS9's Rejoined, Jadzia Dax, also a Trill carrying a symbiont, is serendipitously reunited with another symbiont from a past life through the incarnation of Lenara Khan. In that previous life, the symbionts were involved romantically and had different hosts, a male and a female. In this life, both hosts are female, and their previous romantic relationship threatens to heat back up again.
I don't want to do anything to hurt you. I did that before. I climbed into a shuttlecraft and I made you a widow.
The deterrent preventing them from rekindling that flame is Trill society, which prohibits the reassociation of previously involved symbionts under the threat of exile. With the host and Rejoined, the apparent homosexuality on display is not part of the usual personality of either woman. It is the accidental consequence of an unusual science fiction situation. Maybe Rejoined doesn't bring up gender or sexuality directly as a dramatic question, and it doesn't seem that sexual preference is the biggest issue for Dr. Crusher in The Host. Her objection seems to be at the idea of dealing with multiple hosts, not being attracted to another woman.
Perhaps someday our ability to love won't be so limited.
Star Trek sometimes speaks a little more directly, although still not completely directly, to matters regarding gays and lesbians. One particular episode from Deep Space Nine, Chimera, can be said to discuss matters related to homosexual discrimination, which is an astute observation I am borrowing from a Reddit commenter. In the episode, the isolated Odo encounters Las, a long-lost member of Odo's own changeling species. That changeling species is known as the Founders, the chief architects of the Dominion War against the Federation. The Reddit commenter points out that Chimera covers many things in regards to the modern gay and lesbian experience, from discovering someone in the world is like you.
Why did you board our ship?
Because I sensed you were here. I had to see if it were true. If I'd finally found another metamorph.
To dealing with being yourself in public.
Lars, what's he doing?
Being Fog? What's it look like?
Well, can't he be Fog somewhere else?
Or at night when nobody's around?
He's not hurting anyone.
To dealing with discrimination from friends. Overall, the episode hits the mark pretty well. Chimera even brings up a pretty close comparison with the modern gay rights movement in the form of a typical anti-gay complaint.
Watch your step, Odo. We're at war with your people. This is no time for a changeling pride demonstration on the promenade.
Now, the episode isn't explicit in its treatment of discrimination against homosexuality. It can be read as a commentary regarding any number of disadvantaged minorities. Nevertheless, Chimera makes for a pretty solid entry in the discussion of gay and lesbian representation in Star Trek and is, maybe, underrated in this regard.
Commander, tell me about your sexual organs.
Perhaps the most cited episode regarding the topic of homosexuality is The Next Generation's The Outcast. This classic Alien of the Week tale chronicles the world of the genderless, androgynous Genii, who feel that the gendered existence that humans exhibit is the mark of a lesser developed species. A member of this species, Soren, confesses that occasionally some Genii possess certain urges to be gendered and that these urges are very much frowned upon.
Among my people, there are a few who are born different, who are throwbacks from the era when we all had gender. Some have strong inclinations to maleness, and some have urges to be female.
Soren falls in love with Commander Riker, against the societal norm of Janai culture, and the episode comes to a head when Janai authorities put Soren on the fast track to what's called psychotectic treatment, a procedure surprisingly analogous to modern gay conversion therapies.
All of the loving things that you do with each other, that is what we do. What makes you think you can dictate how people love each other?
This episode turns the idea of discrimination on its head in perfect science fiction fashion, and the viewer is left with a fresh take on gender and sexual issues in Western society. Like Chimera, this episode does not have a happy ending, which is more fitting with the real-world difficulties of being gay.
I love you.
I'm sorry.
Next, the Enterprise episode Stigma illustrates just how close Star Trek can get to discussing the gay and lesbian experience. In this case, the issue in focus is HIV/AIDS and the discrimination that infected patients were subject to during the early years of the AIDS epidemic in the United States. Writers used T'Pol's Panar syndrome, a degenerative disease she contracted during a forced mind meld, as a means to discuss the HIV/AIDS perspective. For Vulcans of this time period, mind melding was considered an unacceptable act, practiced among an undesirable minority. Panar syndrome was associated with that minority, and reaction to it was used as a means to formally discriminate against them.
We find their behavior unacceptable. And since Panar syndrome is transmitted by these people, its cure is not a priority.
We don't condone the intimate acts that these people engage in. They defy everything our society stands for.
Instead of helping T'Pol, the Vulcan doctors call her out, forcing her to go public about her condition and thus threatening her entire career aboard Enterprise. The episode asks the question at the root of such knee-jerk discriminations found in human societies, which is this: is it okay to turn a blind eye to suffering as long as you disapprove of some aspect of the person who is sick?
We got rid of bigotry nearly a century ago. We're not afraid of diversity. We don't persecute it, we embrace it. If you call yourselves enlightened, you have to accept people who are different than you are.
Between the outcast and stigma, we can see that Star Trek has focused mostly on the discrimination factor relating to sexual behaviors society deems unacceptable. Unfortunately, this is the most detailed Star Trek gets on screen in regards to this discussion. There was one direct attempt to bring homosexuality more fully into the Star Trek multiverse, but unfortunately the attempt failed. I am talking about a Next Generation episode called Blood and Fire, written by the same writer who gave us The Trouble with Tribbles, David Gerrold. Blood and Fire focused on a metaphor of the AIDS epidemic and the hysteria surrounding it through the use of 24th century Regulan bloodworms. The background of this proposed episode would have featured a casually gay couple as the episode's B-story. Although the script was purchased by Next Generation producers, and despite various rewrites by Gerrold and by Herbert Wright, the story was never filmed. Concerns over openly depicting an incidental gay relationship in early 1990s syndicated television worried studio executives and showrunners, so they decided to go in another direction. Star Trek would later get its AIDS story through the previously mentioned Enterprise episode Stigma, and through Blood and Fire, which eventually did get produced, first as a novel and finally as an episode of the non-canon fan series Star Trek Phase 2, which was directed by Gerrold himself. Controversy is the most likely culprit preventing Star Trek from addressing homosexuality more directly than what we've seen here. Various writers and producers, such as Ronald D. Moore and Brannon Braga, have suggested some reasons as to why Trek couldn't be forward enough to handle this topic. Which begs the question, is gay and lesbian representation through story or character even necessary in Star Trek? Should we really be concerned with ticking this box? I am going to say yes, and the reason is twofold. One, the United States, like any group of humans, should use its arts as a means of public conversation about our collective experiences. And the LGBT rights struggle has been a critical story in our contemporary life in America and the West. And two, on-screen representation matters. For example, Catherine Trentacosta sums up her feelings about seeing Captain Janeway as a Star Trek character as such. It is impossible to overstate how important it was for me to see that. I wanted to be Captain Janeway more than I've ever wanted to be any character. It was, hilariously enough considering this was a show that takes place in the future on a spaceship, the most attainable position of female leadership I'd ever seen. Just imagine the positive impact that more solid gay and lesbian representation in Star Trek might have on our next generation. Thank you for watching. Please feel free to leave a comment in the subspace below and click on over to Patreon to support the channel. And if you are curious as to what it is we do during the day, then I suggest you check out our weekly vlog, a kind of awkward chronicle of our filmmaking adventures. Thank you.